sure about this?
Imagine this. You're in a meeting and your manager denies a plan you both agreed to yesterday. You look to your colleagues for support, but they're silent. You check your email for the proof, but the key attachment is mysteriously missing. You're not in a horror movie. You're at work. Today, we are sharing 4 true unsettling stories of a quiet, insidious, and terrifyingly common form of psychological warfare, gaslighting in the workplace. The true horror of this tactic isn't a sudden shock. It's a slow, methodical erosion of your own sanity. It's that cold, sinking feeling in your stomach when your memory is questioned, your competence is undermined, and you start to believe that you are the problem. It's the quiet, maddening paranoia of not knowing if you are forgetful or incompetent, or if you are being deliberately and invisibly manipulated. This is the professional's nightmare, losing not your job, but your own mind. But this isn't just tough management. It's a calculated abuse. By exploring these real accounts, from a meeting that never happened to performance targets that were changed after the fact, we will expose the subtle tactics and the red flags of this toxic behavior. These stories are more than just unsettling corporate tales. They are a field guide to recognizing a monster that hides in plain sight, a monster that wears a suit and tie. Now, before we check our notes, make sure you are subscribed to Whispered Fear and have activated the bell. You'll want a record of this so no one can say it never happened. Our first story is about the quiet, brutal warfare of the modern office. It's not a story about ghosts or monsters, but about a far more common, and perhaps more terrifying, kind of predator, the one that wears a tailored suit, speaks in the calm, reasonable tones of corporate jargon, and has the power to rewrite your reality. It comes from a woman named Chloe, a marketing manager who learned that the most dangerous weapon in the workplace isn't a bad performance review. It's the simple, devastating phrase, "I think you're misremembering." At 34, Chloe's life was a carefully constructed fortress, built on a foundation of competence. She was a senior marketing manager for a fast-growing, ruthlessly competitive tech firm in Seattle, Washington. The company, called Synergex, had its gleaming glass and steel headquarters in the South Lake, Union neighborhood, a part of the city that felt less like a place and more like a campus for the new gods of the digital age. Chloe's world was one of KPIs, of Q4 projections, of a constant, unrelenting pressure to perform. She was good at her job. She was more than good. She was brilliant. She had a mind that could see the patterns in the chaos, a talent for turning complex data into a simple, compelling story. Her career was everything. She had sacrificed relationships, hobbies, and a significant amount of sleep to build it. Her small, minimalist apartment in a Belltown high-rise was less a home and more a docking station, a place to recharge just enough to get back into the fight. Her boss, a man named Julian Vance, was the architect of the company's aggressive, move fast and break things culture. He was a charismatic, intelligent, and deeply intimidating man in his late 40s, a titan of the Seattle tech scene. He was known for his brilliant, intuitive grasp of the market, and for his brutal, almost surgical precision in cutting out anything, or anyone, he deemed inefficient. To be praised by Julian was to be anointed. To be questioned by him was a death sentence. Chloe's relationship with him was a careful professional dance of respect and a quiet, constant fear. The project that would become her personal battleground was the biggest of her career. It was the launch of a new flagship software suite, a product codenamed Project Chimera. The success or failure of this launch would determine the future of the company for the next 5 years, and it was her baby. She had spent the last 6 months of her life in the trenches, working 80-hour weeks, managing a team of 12 people, and pouring every ounce of her creative and strategic energy into the plan. The meeting that would become the central maddening mystery of her life took place on a Monday morning. It was the final go, no-go meeting before the launch. The room was the main boardroom on the 30th floor, a sterile, glass-walled space with A panoramic view of Lake Union. The entire senior leadership team was there. Julian sat at the head of the long, polished conference table. Chloe was a nervous wreck, but she was prepared. For an hour, she walked them through the final, meticulously detailed launch strategy, the digital ad spend, the social media campaign, the press outreach. She had an answer for every question, a contingency for every risk. At the end of the presentation, there was a moment of silence. Then Julian, who had been listening with his usual unreadable expression, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He'd said, his voice the calm, authoritative instrument of final judgment. "Good work, Chloe. It's a solid plan. Aggressive. I like it. But there's one change I want to make." He pointed to a single line item on the budget projection on the main screen. The budget for a series of high-profile launch events in New York and San Francisco. "This," he said, "is a waste. The ROI is too unpredictable. I want you to reallocate this entire budget, every dollar, into the digital ad buy, specifically targeted buys on LinkedIn and Twitter. I want to dominate the professional space. Can you make that happen?" It was a major last-minute change. It would mean scrapping months of work, canceling contracts, and a frantic week-long scramble to re-strategize the entire digital campaign. But it was a direct order. "Yes, of course," Chloe had said, her mind already racing. "I can make that happen." The rest of the team had nodded in agreement. The decision was made. The meeting was adjourned. The new plan was in motion. Chloe and her team spent the next 72 hours in a state of controlled, caffeine-fueled chaos. They worked around the clock, canceling the events, reallocating the 7-figure budget, and building a new, hyper-aggressive digital campaign. It was a Herculean effort, but they did it. By Thursday morning, the new strategy was locked in, the new ad buys were scheduled, and Chloe had sent a detailed final plan summary email to Julian and the entire leadership team, with the subject line, Project Chimera, Final Launch Strategy, updated as per Monday's meeting. The email, she would later realize, was her first and last piece of tangible proof of her own sanity. The first hint that her reality was beginning to fracture came in a meeting on Friday afternoon. It was a small follow-up meeting with Julian and the head of finance. Julian was looking at the new budget on the screen, a deep, thoughtful frown on his face. He said, his tone a quiet, neutral sound that immediately set her teeth on edge. "This is very aggressive, Chloe. You've put the entire events budget into the digital buy. That's a big gamble." Chloe just stared at him, a cold knot of confusion forming in her stomach. She said, her voice careful, "It is, but that was the plan we agreed to in the meeting on Monday." Julian looked up from the screen, his intelligent eyes meeting hers. He didn't look angry. He just looked confused. He repeated, a small questioning tilt to his head. "The meeting on Monday? I don't recall that." "Decision, Chloe. My recollection is that we agreed to consider a reallocation, pending a final analysis of the projected ROI from the events team." The world seemed to slow down. The air in the small glass-walled room grew thick, heavy. She looked at the head of finance, a man named David, expecting him to back her up, but he just stared at his own notepad, his expression a perfect, neutral mask of corporate non-engagement. "No," Chloe said, her voice a little too loud, a little too sharp. "No," we agreed. "You told me to reallocate the budget. We all agreed." Julian just gave her a calm, patient, and deeply patronizing smile. He said, his voice the gentle, reasonable tone of a man trying to calm a hysterical child, "Chloe, I think you're misremembering. You've been under a lot of pressure. It's an easy mistake to make. Why don't you go back, pull the minutes from the Monday meeting, and we can all get on the same page." It was a perfect, elegant, and utterly devastating move. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't accusing. He was just calmly, reasonably suggesting that her own memory was faulty. He was planting a seed of doubt, not just in the minds of everyone else in the room, but in her own. It was a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. She went back to her desk, her mind a screaming chaos of disbelief and self-doubt. Had she misremembered? Had she misinterpreted a suggestion as a direct order? No, she was certain. She had a perfect eidetic memory for conversations. She remembered the exact words, the exact tone. She would prove it. She opened her email and searched for the meeting minutes. The minutes were always sent out by Julian's executive assistant within an hour of a major meeting. She found the email. She opened the attached document, and she read it. The minutes were a perfect detailed summary of her presentation, but the final section under action items was a lie. It read, Chloe to conduct a final ROI analysis on the proposed launch events and present her findings for a final decision by Friday. There was no mention of a reallocation, no mention of a direct order. The official written record of the meeting now contradicted her own perfect memory. She felt a wave of dizzying vertigo. The world was tilting on its axis. But she had one last piece of proof. Her own email. The one she had sent on Thursday morning, with the subject line that explicitly mentioned the Monday meeting. She found the email in her sent folder. She opened it. The body of the email detailed the new digital-only strategy. But the subject line had been changed. It no longer read, updated as per Monday's meeting. It now simply read, Project Chimera, Final Launch Strategy Proposal, and the original attachment, the one with the detailed budget, was gone, replaced by a different earlier version of the plan. She was not just being told she was wrong. The digital reality of her own work was being actively and invisibly rewritten around her. She spent the weekend in a state of paranoid, obsessive torment. She reread every email, every chat message. She replayed the meeting in her mind, 100 times, 1,000 times, searching for a crack in her own memory. Was she going crazy? Was the pressure of the launch finally causing her to break? The doubt was a poison, seeping into the very foundation of her own sense of self. The final public execution took place on Monday morning, exactly 1 week after the meeting that had apparently never happened. It was a full team-wide launch meeting. Julian began the meeting with a grave, serious expression. Team, he began. I'm afraid we have a serious issue with the Chimera launch. It has come to my attention that due to a significant misunderstanding on the part of the marketing team, the entire budget for our launch events was incorrectly reallocated to a high-risk, unvetted digital ad buy. This has put the entire launch and the future of this company in a position of extreme jeopardy. He didn't look at her, but every single eye in the room turned to her. She could feel the weight of their gaze, a physical pressure, the silent collective judgment. She stammered, her voice a small, weak thing in the large, silent room. That's not what happened. We were told to do that, in the meeting last Monday. Julian just looked at her, his face a mask of profound and deeply convincing disappointment, he said, his voice a quiet, sad sound of a leader forced to deal with a failing subordinate. Chloe, we've been over this. There was no such decision in that meeting. I think you're confused. He looked around at the other senior managers in the room, the ones who had been in the original meeting. He asked, does anyone else recall this decision? And in that moment, Chloe experienced the true soul-crushing horror of corporate gaslighting. The silence, the averted eyes, the quiet, complicit non-engagement of a dozen different people who knew the truth, but who also knew that their own survival depended on their silence. To contradict Julian was to commit professional suicide, and so they chose to become silent, passive accomplices in the quiet, methodical murder of her career. She was alone, utterly and completely alone. She was a Cassandra in a world of silent, terrified Trojans. The rest of the meeting was a blur. She was officially taken off the project, her baby, the project she had poured her life into, given to another manager to get it back on track. She was not fired. That would have been too merciful. She was left to twist in the wind, a public example of incompetence, a ghost in her own office. She spent the afternoon at her desk in a state of numb, silent shock, the quiet, pitying glances of her colleagues 1,000 tiny cuts. She was a woman who had built her entire identity on her competence, on her mind, and that identity had been taken from her, not by a failure of her own, but by the quiet, collective lie of an entire room. The final, horrifying, and deeply human resolution to her nightmare came not from an email or a document, but from a whisper. At the end of the day, as she was packing her bag to leave the office she knew she would never return to, a young, junior analyst from her own team, a quiet, shy kid named Ben, came to her desk. He looked terrified. He leaned in close. He whispered, his eyes darting around the empty office. "I know you're not crazy. I was there in the meeting. I heard him." A single hot tear rolled down Chloe's cheek, a tear of profound, heartbreaking validation. She whispered back, "Why? Why is he doing this?" Ben glanced over his shoulder. "The launch," he whispered. "The original plan, the one with the events, it was going to be a huge success. Too much of a success. The word on the street is, you were being groomed to be his replacement. He couldn't have that. So he created a crisis. He manufactured a failure that he could pin on you, a failure that would make him look like the hero when he fixed it." The final, chilling piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This hadn't been about a disagreement in strategy. It had been about a threat. Her competence, her success had been a threat to his own power, and he had, with the calm, surgical precision of a master manipulator, not just removed her from the board. He had made her believe. She had knocked over the pieces herself. She was left with a knowledge that was a form of a living death. The corporate world she had dedicated her life to was not a meritocracy. It was a battlefield, and the most dangerous weapons were not spreadsheets and data, but whispers and lies and the quiet, collective cowardice of silent witnesses. She had not been a victim of a simple act of gaslighting. She had been the target of a meticulously planned and flawlessly executed psychological assassination. And she is left with the quiet, chilling knowledge that the meeting that never happened was the most real and the most important meeting of her entire life.
Who gave you that idea?
Our next story is about a quiet kind of theft. It's not the theft of an object, but of an idea, of authorship, of the very confidence that allows a person to succeed. It comes from a young woman named Anna, a talented designer who learned that the most dangerous predator in the corporate world is not the one who shouts and threatens, but the one who smiles, who praises you, and who, with a single, carefully crafted complimentary sentence, can slowly, methodically, and completely steal your own success from right under your nose. At 27, Anna's life was a fragile, beautiful thing, a dream she was terrified of waking up from. She was a junior art director at Argent & Sterling, a high-end advertising agency with a sleek, minimalist office in New York City's Flatiron. District turned to an outsider, she was a success story, a girl from a small town in Ohio who had clawed her way through the Pratt Institute and into the cutthroat world of Madison Avenue. But on the inside, she was a constant buzzing hive of imposter syndrome. She was a woman who believed in the deepest, most secret part of her soul that she was a fraud, and that any day now, someone would find her out. Her talent was real, but her confidence was a carefully constructed facade, a delicate house of cards built on a foundation of anxiety. The man who would eventually blow that house down was David Sterling, one of the firm's founding partners and its legendary creative director. He was a titan of the industry, a man in his late 50s with a sharp, tailored suit, a warm, charismatic smile, and a portfolio of award-winning campaigns that had defined a generation of advertising. He was brilliant, and he was, to Anna, a god. When he had taken a personal interest in her, becoming her unofficial mentor, it felt like a benediction. He would praise her work, offer insightful critiques, and champion her ideas in meetings. He was the validation she had been searching for her entire life. She didn't just respect him, she revered him. The first compliment with a hook, the first subtle injection of poison, came after her first major success at the firm. She had been tasked with creating a concept for a new, high-end perfume line. For weeks, she had worked, herself to the bone, filling sketchpads with ideas. The final concept had come to her in a flash of inspiration at 3 a.m., a single perfect idea that she knew, with a rare crystalline certainty, was a winner. It was a campaign built around the Japanese art of kintsugi, the practice of repairing broken pottery with gold, celebrating the beauty of imperfection. She presented the deck in a high-stakes meeting with the client. It was a triumph. The clients were blown away. The senior partners were thrilled. After the meeting, Julian, the account lead, had pulled her aside. "Amazing work, Anna. Truly, you're a star." She was floating, a rare, beautiful feeling of pure, unadulterated confidence. Later that day, David called her into his corner office, a glass-walled sanctuary with a panoramic view of Madison Square Park. He began, his voice the familiar, warm baritone of her trusted mentor, Anna. That was, without a doubt, one of the best concept decks I have seen in years. Truly fantastic work. "Thank you, David," she said, her heart soaring. This was it. The anointing. He smiled his warm, charismatic smile. "That quiet little brainstorming session we had last week really paid off, didn't it? I knew the moment we started talking about Japanese art that you would find the right angle. You just needed a little nudge." Anna just stared at him, her own smile frozen on her face. The brainstorming session. He was referring to a brief, 5-minute chat they'd had in the hallway, where he had mentioned a recent trip to Japan and she had politely nodded along. The kintsugi concept had not come from that conversation. It had come from her own late-night solitary work. But his words, his confident proprietary framing of the event, were a powerful retroactive rewriting of history. She was so stunned, so thrown off by the sheer confident audacity of the statement, that she didn't know what to say. So, she said nothing. She just nodded, a small, confused, and deeply unsettling flicker of doubt now lit in the back of her mind. Had she been subconsciously influenced by him? Was the idea not truly hers? This became the pattern. Every time she had a major success, a brilliant idea, David would praise her lavishly publicly, and then in private he would deliver the hook. He would find a way to tie the genesis of her idea back to a conversation with him, a suggestion from a colleague, a piece of research he had sent her. He never stole the credit outright. He just shared it, retroactively, positioning himself as the quiet, humble, and essential catalyst for her brilliance. "Great work on the Subaru campaign, Anna," he would say. "That tagline you came up with was genius. It's amazing what a fresh pair of eyes can do with the initial research deck the team put together." The implication was clear. The idea wasn't hers. It was just a clever interpretation of the team's work. "This is a winning concept, Anna," he would tell her after another successful pitch. "You just got lucky that the client was in a good mood. They bought the first thing they saw. It almost never happens that way." Her success was not a product of her talent but of luck. His successes, on the other hand, were always framed as a product of pure, singular vision. It was a slow, methodical, and utterly devastating campaign of psychological warfare, and it was working. Anna's imposter syndrome, once a quiet, manageable hum, had become a roaring, deafening siren. She began to doubt every idea she had. Was it really hers? Or had she subconsciously stolen it from a conversation, an email, a shared document? Her confidence, the fragile, beautiful thing she had worked so hard to build, was being systematically dismantled piece by piece. She was becoming hesitant, quiet in meetings, afraid to present her own ideas for fear that they were not her own. She was becoming exactly what he needed her to be, a talented but ultimately non-threatening subordinate, a pair of skilled hands to execute the visions that he, the great David Sterling, would subtly, quietly, and expertly claim as his own. The gaslighting was so subtle, so wrapped in the language of mentorship and praise, that she didn't even see it as an attack. She saw it as a confirmation of her own deepest fears. The final, soul-crushing blow came a year later. The firm was up for its most prestigious award, a Gold Clio, for a massive integrated campaign for a new electric vehicle. The campaign, codenamed Project Volta, had been Anna's. From the EBAR, initial lightning-in-a-bottle concept, to the final grueling months-long execution, she had been the driving force, the singular, creative engine. It was the best work of her life, and she knew it. The agency won. The Clio was a massive victory, a testament to the firm's creative prowess. The entire office celebrated. David, in a company-wide email, praised the team's incredible collaborative effort. The next day, the official submission details were published on the Clio Awards website. Anna went to the site, her heart pounding, ready to see her own name, to finally have the tangible, undeniable proof of her own success. She found the submission, Argent and Sterling, Gold Clio for Integrated Campaign, and she saw the credits. Creative Director David Sterling, Associate Creative Director Mark Johnson, Senior Copywriter Richard Price. Her name was not there. She stared at the screen, the words a blurry, meaningless jumble. She had not been a collaborator. She had been erased. Her entire year-long soul-crushing effort, the best work of her entire life, had been completely and utterly written out of the official history. She confronted him that afternoon. She walked into his glass-walled office, the Clio Award now sitting on his desk, a gleaming golden idol to a false god, and she placed a printout of the credits page in front of him. She asked, her voice a low, trembling sound, not of anger but of a profound and deeply broken grief. Why? Why is my name not on it? David looked at the page, and then up at her, his face a mask of calm, professional concern, an expression she now recognized as the opening move in his terrifying game. He said, his voice the familiar, soothing baritone that had once been her comfort and was now the sound of her own personal hell. Anna, there must be a mistake. A clerical error. The awards committee must have omitted it. I'll make a call right now. He was so smooth, so convincing. But she saw it. A flicker of something in his eyes. A flash of cold, triumphant victory. He was lying, and he was a brilliant, practiced and utterly remorseless liar. She said, her voice quiet but with a new, hard and unfamiliar strength. It wasn't a mistake. It was you. His expression shifted. The mask of concern fell away, replaced by a look of cold, quiet disappointment. A look he reserved for subordinates who were not being team players. He said, his voice now a low, warning tone. Anna, I think you are overreacting. The award is for the agency. It's a win for all of us. To try and claim this as your own singular achievement is unprofessional and, frankly, a little selfish. I thought you were better than that. And there it was. The final perfect and devastating move. Her completely justified and factually correct claim of authorship had been reframed as an act of selfish, unprofessional ambition. He was not the thief. She was the one who was ungrateful. She stood there in his silent, glass-walled office looking at the man she had once revered, the man who had, with a series of quiet, praise-filled conversations, systematically dismantled her confidence, and then at the final moment erased her from her own story. And she finally understood the true nature of the monster she was dealing with. He was not a simple credit thief. He was a psychological vampire, a man who fed on the talent and the confidence of the young, brilliant people around him, a man who maintained his own legendary status by quietly, methodically, and completely devouring the souls of his own protégés. She was left with a choice that was no choice at all. She could stay and fight and be labeled as difficult, as not a team player, a label that would be a death sentence in the insular, reputation-driven world of advertising, or she could leave, silently, another quiet, unexplained casualty of a toxic but brilliant man. She chose to leave. She now works at a small independent design studio in Brooklyn. She is happy. She is successful. But she is haunted. She is haunted by the quiet, chilling knowledge that the most dangerous monsters are not the ones who attack you, but the ones who praise you, the ones who, with a kind word and a warm smile, can convince you that your own brilliant and beautiful ideas were never really yours at all. And she is left with a single, persistent, and terrifying question: how? Many of the great geniuses of our world are not creators at all, but just the final, polished, and celebrated curators of 100 different stolen and forgotten voices.
That was never the plan.
Our next story is about a quiet, invisible, and terrifyingly common form of corporate warfare. It's not about shouting matches or public confrontations. It's about the silent digital manipulation of reality itself. It comes from a project manager named David, a good, competent man who learned that the most dangerous enemy is not the one who attacks you, but the one who calmly, methodically, and invisibly rewrites the past to ensure that you have already failed before you even knew you were in a fight. At 38, David's life was a carefully balanced system. He was a senior project manager for Syntec Logistics, a rapidly growing supply chain management company in Austin, Texas. His world was one of Gantt charts, of stakeholder meetings, of the clean, logical, and predictable flow of data from one point to another. He was a man who believed in the system. He believed in process and documentation in a shared, verifiable reality. His office, in a gleaming modern building in the Domain, was his kingdom of order. His home, a modest but comfortable house in the family-friendly suburb of Cedar Park, was his sanctuary of peace. He had a wife he adored, a 10-year-old son who was his entire world, and a career he had spent 15 years carefully, meticulously building. He was a man who believed that if you did good work, if you followed the rules, you would be safe. The project that would destroy that belief was called Project Apex. It was a massive, high-stakes, and deeply troubled logistics overhaul for a major tech client. The project had been failing for a year, a revolving door of managers who had been chewed up and spit out by its impossible demands. When David was assigned to it, it was not an opportunity. It was a death sentence. But it came with a new boss, a new senior director of operations, who had been brought in specifically to turn the company's failing projects around. Her name was Cynthia. Cynthia was a force of nature. She was charismatic, brilliant, and radiated an aura of calm, unshakable confidence. She was a legend, a corporate fixer known for her ability to walk into a fire and emerge, not just unscathed, but victorious. In her first meeting with David, she was everything a beleaguered project manager could have dreamed of. She was supportive, she was understanding, and she was, most importantly, realistic. She had said, her voice a calm, reassuring instrument in the sterile, glass-walled conference room. "I've read the reports, David. The previous targets on this project were insane. They set your predecessors up to fail. We're not going to do that. We are going to build a new, achievable, and data-driven plan. We are going to win, together." For the first time in a year, the team felt a flicker of hope. They spent the next week in a series of intense but productive planning sessions. Cynthia was a master. She helped them deconstruct the project, identify the real blockers, and build a new, realistic timeline with clear, quantifiable, and achievable goals. It was a masterpiece of project management. At the end of the week, they had a new project plan, a new set of KPIs, a new budget. Everything was documented in the company's shared Asana project management software. Every task, every deadline, every goal was a verifiable, digital fact. David felt a profound sense of relief. He was not on a suicide mission. He was on a rescue mission, and he had a brilliant, supportive captain at the helm. The first phase of the project was a resounding success. David's team, energized and motivated by the new, clear plan, worked with a fierce, focused intensity. They hit every single one of their targets, on time and under budget. It was a small, but significant victory. The review meeting for Phase 1 took place on a Monday morning. David walked into the conference room feeling confident, proud. The numbers were on his side. The data was clear. Cynthia began the meeting with a smile, but it was not the warm, collaborative smile from the planning sessions. It was a thin, tight, and unreadable expression. She began, her voice a calm, neutral sound. Thank you for the report, David. The team has clearly worked very hard. However, I'm concerned that we've missed the mark on a key strategic objective for this phase. David just stared at her, a cold knot of confusion forming in his stomach. I'm sorry? He said. We hit all the KPIs we agreed to. Cynthia said, her voice still maddeningly calm. You hit the operational KPIs, yes? But the strategic goal, the one we discussed in our final planning session, was to complete the phase, 15% under the revised budget, to create a surplus we could reallocate to the overruns in Phase 3. Your team came in at 8% under budget. It's a good result. But it's not the result we had agreed upon. The room was silent. David's mind was racing. He had no memory of this conversation. A 15% surplus had never been the goal. The goal was simply to come in under budget, which they had. He looked around at the other managers in the room, expecting someone to back him up. They just stared at their laptops, their faces blank, their silence a deafening roar. He stammered, his own voice sounding weak, uncertain. I don't recall that, Cynthia. I have the project plan right here. The documented goal was... He pulled up the Asana project on the main screen. He navigated to the goals page for Phase 1, and he felt the blood drain from his face. The goal was not what he remembered. The text, which he knew, with an absolute bone-deep certainty, had simply said, deliver under budget, now read, deliver with a minimum 15%, budget surplus. He stared at the screen, his mind unable to process the contradiction, but the data was right there. The digital, verifiable, and utterly irrefutable fact, and next to it the small damning timestamp. Edited by Cynthia Vance 2 weeks ago. He had missed it. In the chaos of the project, in the hundreds of daily updates and notifications, he had somehow impossibly missed this crucial, project-altering change. The failure wasn't in the team's performance. The failure was in his own, inattentive, and incompetent management. He could only manage to say, his voice a dry, hoarse whisper, I see. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, suffocating blanket. Cynthia said, her voice now warm again, magnanimous in victory. It's all right, David. It's a small stumble. We'll make it up in the next phase. Just try to keep your eye on the ball. This became the new, terrifying, and maddening pattern of the project. At the beginning of each new phase, Cynthia would help them set clear, achievable goals. They would be documented, agreed upon. David, now paranoid and hyper-vigilant, would take screenshots of the project plan, save local copies of every document, a desperate secret archive of his own sanity. His team would work themselves to the bone, hitting every single target, and in every single review meeting the targets would have changed. The goalposts were not just moved, they were teleported to a different dimension. A deadline would be secretly moved up by a week. A key feature, once listed as a stretch goal, would be retroactively relabeled as a critical requirement. The paper trail was always, without fail, perfect. The changes were always time-stamped days or weeks in the past. Every success was expertly and invisibly reframed as a failure. The psychological toll was brutal. David was living in a constant state of gaslighting, his own meticulously collected evidence of reality, constantly contradicted by the shared and constantly shifting reality of the corporate record. He would show his screenshots to his own team members, and they would just look at him with a mixture of pity and fear. One of his best engineers had said, his eyes darting towards the door, I don't know, man. The system says what it says. I don't want any trouble. He was alone. His colleagues, his team, they were not his allies. They were silent, terrified witnesses to his slow, methodical execution. He was being digitally and professionally erased. His reputation, once spotless, was now that of a man who was unreliable, confused, unable to keep up. The man who always, somehow, missed the memo. The blocker. The final devastating act of this corporate horror story took place at the very end of the project. After 6 months of hell, his team, against all odds, had done it. They had delivered Project Apex. It was a triumph of engineering, a minor miracle of project management. And David, paranoid but prepared, had the proof. He had a folder on his personal hard drive, a complete, uneditable, time-stamped history of the entire project. Every original goal, every secret, retroactive change. He had the truth. The final project review meeting was with the CEO. David walked into the boardroom, his heart a cold, hard knot of fear and a grim, defiant resolve. He was ready for a fight. Cynthia began the presentation. She praised the team's hard work, and then she put up the final slide. It was a summary of the project's performance against its key objectives, and it was a sea of red. Failed. Missed. Under-delivered. The project, according to her presentation, had been a catastrophic failure, Cynthia said, her voice a somber, disappointed sound. As you can see, while the team worked hard, a series of critical management failures and a consistent inability to meet the project's core, strategic targets, led to a significant budget overrun and a delayed delivery. This was it, the final public execution, David said, his voice quiet but clear, cutting through the silence of the room. That's not true. He stood up and connected his own laptop to the projector. I have the original project plan, the original targets, and I have a complete time-stamped record of every single retroactive change that was made to those targets after the work had been completed. He projected his own screen, his secret folder of truth, his meticulously collected evidence of the gaslighting he had endured for 6 months. And he saw it. The files. They were all there. But the names, the contents, they were wrong. The screenshots now showed the new, altered goals. The locally saved documents were now identical to the manipulated ones on the company server. The timestamps were all wrong. His entire secret archive of reality had been corrupted, rewritten. He stared at the screen, a wave of pure, undiluted horror washing over him. It wasn't just the company's shared drive that she had been manipulating. She had been inside his own computer, his own personal and supposedly secure fortress. He looked across the table at Cynthia. She was just looking at him, a small, cold, and utterly triumphant smile on her face. A smile that said, "Checkmate." He was left with a truth more horrifying than any ghost. This had never been a project. It had been a setup, a long, meticulous, and brilliantly executed campaign designed for one purpose: to create a scapegoat. The company had overpromised the client. The project had been designed to fail from the very beginning, and his job, the job he had been so proud of, had been to be the man who would take the fall. Cynthia hadn't been his manager. She had been his executioner. He was placed on a performance improvement plan, a quiet corporate form of exile. He quit a week later. The career he had spent 15 years building was over, destroyed by a weapon he had never even known existed: the quiet, invisible, and absolute power to edit the past. He is left now with a profound and deeply unsettling paranoia. He no longer trusts the digital world. Every email, every shared document is a potential forgery. He lives in a world of screenshots and paper copies, a man haunted by the knowledge that reality itself is a collaborative document, and that some people, the ones with the administrative privileges, can at any moment and for any reason simply revoke your access to the truth.
You're being damaged, me.
Our final story is about the most dangerous kind of ghosting. It's not about unanswered text messages or disappearing dates. It's about the slow, silent, and systematic erasure of a person's professional identity. It comes from a woman named Emily, a brilliant engineer who learned that the most effective cage in the corporate world is not a cubicle, but a label, a simple, deniable, and utterly devastating label that, once it sticks, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. A quiet, career-killing curse from which there is no escape. At 29, Emily's world was a beautiful, complex, and elegant system. She was a senior software engineer at Innovate Dynamics, a large but aging tech giant with a sprawling corporate campus in the heart of North Carolina's research, Triangle Park. She was a rising star, in a world of legacy systems and this is how we've always done it thinking. Emily was a firebrand. She was a brilliant, innovative coder who saw not just problems but elegant, revolutionary solutions. Her passion was her greatest asset. She believed, with the fierce, unjaded optimism of the truly talented, that a good idea, backed by solid data, could change the world, or at the very least her company. She had a small but supportive group of friends, a loving family back in Ohio, and a career that was on a steep upward trajectory. She had everything to lose, and she had no idea she was about to lose it all. The man who would become the quiet architect of her professional demise was her new manager, Robert. He was a man in his late 40s, a company man in the truest sense of the word. He had been at Innovate Dynamics for 20 years, a master of navigating its complex and often toxic corporate politics. He was not an innovator, he was a manager, a man who valued process over progress, conformity over creativity. On the surface, he was supportive, his language a perfect, smooth veneer of corporate jargon and empty encouragement. But underneath, Emily would soon learn, he was a man who was deeply and quietly threatened by anyone who challenged the status quo. The beginning of the end was a project that should have been her greatest triumph. It was a legacy software system, the company's flagship product, and it was a mess, a bloated, inefficient, and bug-ridden piece of code that was costing the TUD company millions in maintenance and lost clients. For years, everyone had been too afraid to touch it. Emily was not afraid. She spent a month of her own, unpaid time, digging into its archaic code, and she found a solution. Not a patch, but a complete, revolutionary rewrite. It was a brilliant, elegant, and undeniably superior plan. She presented her findings in a project meeting with Robert and the other senior engineers. She laid out the data, the projected cost savings, the clear, logical path forward. When she was finished, the room was silent. The other engineers, men, who had been working on this broken system for a decade, looked at her with a mixture of awe and terror. She had just, in a single 30-minute presentation, exposed the profound systemic failures of their entire department. Robert's reaction was not one of excitement. It was a quiet, almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. He smiled, a thin, professional smile that did not reach his eyes. He'd said, the word ambitious, a subtle, but clear, pejorative. This is very ambitious, Emily, a very disruptive idea. Let us take it under advisement. 2 days later, the first label was applied. Emily was in a meeting with a different department, a team she needed to collaborate with on a smaller project. Robert introduced her. He started with a compliment, as he always did, he said, his voice a warm paternal sound. This is Emily Thorne, one of the most brilliant, out-of-the-box thinkers we have on our team. He paused, letting the praise land. And then came the hook, which means, of course, that she can sometimes be a little hard to align. She's a purist, she has a vision, and she is not easily swayed by practical realities. It was a masterful and utterly deniable act of psychological sabotage. He had praised her brilliance, but he had framed it as a liability. He had labeled her not as a visionary, but as a difficult, impractical idealist. He had planted a seed of doubt. The effects were subtle but immediate. The other team lead, who had been open and collaborative, was now slightly more formal, more guarded with her. An email she sent with a suggestion was met not with enthusiasm, but with a polite, "Thank you, will take that into consideration." The doors of collaboration had not been slammed shut. They had just been quietly and firmly closed an inch. This became Robert's signature move. In every introduction, in every meeting, he would deploy the label, always wrapped in the soft, protective packaging of a compliment. Emily is a force of nature. You'll have to forgive her passion. Emily's strength is her independent thinking, which means she sometimes struggles with the collaborative process. Emily is a visionary, which means she doesn't always have the patience for the necessary and sometimes boring details of corporate procedure. brilliant but hard to align, passionate but not a team player, a visionary but not a manager. The gaslighting was a slow, steady, and constant drip of quiet, professional poison. The premium projects began to vanish. A new, high-profile and deeply innovative project was announced, a perfect fit for her unique skills. She wasn't just not chosen for it, she wasn't even interviewed. It was given to a less talented but more agreeable male colleague. She was slowly, silently, and systematically being moved from the center of the company's future to its periphery. The most insidious part of it all was the effect it had on her own mind. The constant, subtle reinforcement of the label began to erode her own confidence. She started to second-guess herself. Was she being too aggressive in meetings? Was her passion being misinterpreted as arrogance? Was she, in fact, difficult? She started to censor herself. The brilliant firebrand engineer who had arrived at the company full of ideas and a desire to change the world began to disappear, replaced by a quieter, more hesitant, and more aligned employee. She would have a brilliant idea in a meeting, and she would say nothing. A cold, fearful voice in her head, a voice that sounded a lot like Robert's, whispering, "Don't be difficult. Don't be hard to align." The label had become a reality, not because it was ever true, but because he had made her believe it was. He hadn't just managed her reputation, he had hacked her own mind. The final soul-crushing confirmation of her professional erasure came at the end of the year, during her annual performance review. She sat in Robert's office, a familiar, sterile space. He was, as always, polite, professional, and utterly devastating. He slid her review across the desk. It was a sea of meets expectations, not exceeds, not outstanding. Just the quiet, damning mediocrity of meets expectations. He said, his voice a calm, reasonable sound. "It's a solid review, Emily. You do good, solid work. But the feedback from the other team leads is consistent. They find you to be a brilliant individual contributor, but difficult to integrate into a collaborative, team-based environment. You're seen as a lone wolf, a bit of a purist. In a company this size, that can be a career-limiting perception." He was reading her a eulogy for her own career, a eulogy that he himself had written, one quiet, poisonous sentence at a time. She was left with a choice that was no choice at all. She could stay, a ghost in her own career, a solid but unpromotable engineer, forever trapped by a reputation she had not earned, but that was now, undeniably, hers, or she could leave. She chose to leave. She resigned a week later, a quiet, unexplained departure that only seemed to confirm the label he had so expertly crafted for her. She could almost hear him saying in the meeting after she was gone, "See? I told you, not a team player." The final, horrifying resolution came 6 months later. She was at a tech conference in Raleigh, a small networking event at the Raleigh Convention Center. She ran into a woman who had been a senior manager at Innovate Dynamics, a woman who had left the company a year before Emily had. They got to talking, a quiet, candid conversation over bad coffee. Emily, emboldened by the fact that they were both now free, told her the story of Robert, of the labels of her quiet, professional erasure. The woman, a smart, tough, no-nonsense engineer in her 50s, just looked at her, a sad, knowing, and deeply familiar look in her eyes. The woman said, her voice a low, angry sound, "Oh, honey, you got the hard-to-align label? I got the 2. Emotional label. The woman before me, a brilliant data scientist, she got the not strategic enough label." She leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "It's his pattern. He does it to any woman on his team who is smarter or more talented than he is. He finds your greatest strength, and he turns it into a weapon against you. He doesn't fire you. He just gives you a label. And then he lets the quiet, unconscious biases of the corporate world do the rest of the work for him. He builds a consensus of your own incompetence, a quiet, polite, and utterly devastating lie. It's the perfect, untraceable crime." Emily stood in the loud, bustling chaos of the convention center, the truth a cold, hard, and utterly devastating weight in her chest. The haunting hadn't been personal. It had been systemic. She had not been a singular victim of a manipulative boss. She had been just another in a long, invisible line of women who had been quietly, methodically, and expertly erased. She is left with a quiet, chilling knowledge. The most dangerous monsters in the world are not the ones that scream and rage. They are the ones who smile, who praise you, who call you brilliant. They are the ones who can kill your entire future with a single, quiet, and perfectly chosen word. And she is haunted by a final and deeply unsettling question. How many other brilliant, passionate, and difficult women are out there, right now, slowly, silently, and completely disappearing? A meeting that was erased from history, a compliment that was a hidden blade, a finish line that was moved after the race was won, and a label that became a cage. These 4 stories are not about the supernatural. They are about a far more common and far more insidious kind of horror. The quiet, methodical, and soul-crushing violence of psychological warfare in the one place you are supposed to be safe: your job. The true horror of workplace gaslighting is its silence. The monster doesn't scream, it whispers. It doesn't attack you with its fists. It attacks you with your own mind. It is a slow, patient poison that makes you question your memory, your competence, and ultimately, your own sanity. It thrives in the quiet, complicit silence of colleagues who are too afraid to speak up, in the plausible deniability of a misremembered conversation, in the digital ether of an email that can be silently, perfectly rewritten. These accounts force us to confront a chilling and deeply uncomfortable truth. The most dangerous predators in our world are not the ones who hide in the shadows. They are the ones who hide in plain sight, in our boardrooms, in our offices, wearing expensive suits and a warm, charismatic smile. And they leave us with a final, terrifying question. The next time you begin to doubt your own memory at work, is it you who is failing, or is it the system and the people within it that is failing you? If these stories have felt terrifyingly familiar, prove that you know the truth by subscribing to Whispered Fear, leaving a like, and sharing this video. Your support helps us to expose the monsters that hide in the light. But what happens when you finally escape the psychological battlefield of the office and return to your own home? What if you discover that your sanctuary, your apartment, has a quiet, creeping, and deeply personal horror of its own? Click the video on your screen now as we explore the terrors that wait for you after work. 4 true scary stories about the silence of the condominium and everyday threats. See you there, if your neighbors let you.